Okay, so we've been talking about a user story, which is one sentence that describes an action or a goal that the user wants to do. Okay, now the use case is the expansion of that, which is supposed to include all the details of the steps that the user needs to do in order to achieve that goal. Okay, so we're still talking about a goal. Here you can see we're still talking about the goal. Okay, but now we're not just giving a very brief statement. We are talking about the different paths and the details that provide the order and the structure in which the user needs to go through in order to achieve that goal. Now there are so many templates for the use case. This is one of them. As we mentioned before, there are no standards. It's not a standard. This is just one example of a template that gives you an idea what you need to think about. Okay. So if you look at this part, so this part is just metadata. The use case ID can be used for the traceability. Okay. Use case name and the objective. Obviously, this is the main goal. What really matters here, all these are like details, metadata you can add if they are available. But here we have the actor or a user. Okay, so when we were talking about user stories, we only talking about a user, a person, an end user. An actor in a use case doesn't have to be a person. Could be another system that interacts with your system. Okay. So when we are building a use case, we are putting a set of scenarios, both the successful and unsuccessful scenarios, including the detailed steps. Okay, so a scenario is basically a use case is a collection of scenarios, and a scenario is a collection of steps. All right. Now, if we look at what we have here, this is at least we have the main flow. This is the main scenario. So there's a main set of steps that you need to include so that the detail the interaction between your system and the actor. The actor could be a user or another system. Okay? So that says the user action, what? So we're talking about interaction between the user and the system. So here you say what the user is gonna do or what the system is gonna do in reaction of that. Okay? And it has to be a sequence of steps. Now, what other scenarios that we can have? We can have alternative scenarios. So these are not errors. So these are not exceptions. So like you see here, there are alternative scenarios and there are exceptional scenarios. So alternative scenarios are, all the alternatives are correct. Okay. So here, if you have multiple payment methods, so the steps needed to be taken for a payment, like a cash or a check payment, are not the same as the steps that are going to be needed to make a payment with credit card. Okay, both set of steps are correct and valid, but they're just alternatives. Now, when we talk about exceptions, that's when there are errors, when the user doesn't behave the way, or the actor doesn't behave the way they should. What are you gonna do? So these are the exception scenarios. Okay. Now there are other things like preconditions. What needs to be met before you enter the use case? For example, if there is a payment, then the user is logged in. That's a precondition. Okay. All these could be left blank. I mean, at least the main flow should need to be filled. But what is also important is that you need a way to trace the alternatives or the exceptional flows back to the main flow. Okay, so in the main flow, you can have one step that says make payment or finish payment. Okay, just one step. That one step, it says finish payment. And then you can take that and branch it into multiple alternatives. There's one scenario, one branch for the credit card, and another set you can copy and paste this table to create another alternative set of the steps needed for the credit card. Okay, now you have to find a way to make the link. Numbering is the easiest way. So if you say number these 1, 2, 3, then these should be, and then step number 3 is the payment, then these should be 3.1, 3.2, and so on. Okay. Now the diagram is a different thing. So this is one model. The use case itself, you take one user story and expand it in a use case. The user case diagram is the summary of all the use cases. Okay, so you just take the name of the use cases, put them in this bubble, and you should be familiar with the syntax, so the format of the diagram. Okay, so the bubble is the use case. The stick figure is an actor, even if it's not a human, still can use the stick figure. And these links are just the connections between the actor, the initiator, or the participator of the use case. Okay. Now, in the summary is useful in multiple things. It can give you an overview of what needs to be done. Okay, summarizes who's going to be using the system, how, and it's a good reminder of the boundaries. And at every boundary, you need to have an interface. Now, if you, what's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? So if you some people, if you Google it, use a use case diagram, you will see different ways to do it, and a lot of people omit the boundary line. But it is very important visual representation or a reminder of what interfaces you need to include, especially when the actors are not users, especially when the actors are other systems. So you need a reminder or a visual reminder of what is going to be part of your system, what are you going to develop, and what is going to be outside of your system. You're not going to develop it. You just need to create an interface for it. Okay? Now, these intersection line, like the intersection between the boundary and the line coming from the actor, is a visual reminder that you need to provide an interface. Okay? And finally, the nice thing that we can use by looking at the summary is the relationships between the use cases. So there is the include and the extend. So when you have multiple use cases, like when you have a set of steps that you noticed are repeated in multiple use cases, you can just put them in one use case by themselves and make them included. Okay, just to organize your work. So include, when you say a use case includes another use case, means all the steps in the view map, for example, are included in order to achieve the goal of this use case, always. Okay, are essential part of it, are always part of it. When you say extend, so you see the arrows going to the other direction, so it means this use case extend the other use case, which means that it may or may not be included. So the steps in the extending use case may or may not be included in the extended use case. Okay, so there is an option here. There is an alternative way to do the steps for this use case. One of them includes the steps here. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much the includes and the extends relationship. So that's pretty much what summarizes the use case and the use case model. Now I have to say, now there are some recommendations you probably are familiar with, that the name of the use case should be a verb because it describes an action, that the actors are named by nouns. Boundary should be clear. So you see how in the recommendation, the boundary should be clear. So the examples that you're gonna see on the internet that doesn't have the boundary are not correct. The steps in the main flow event should be phrased in the active voice. The causal relationship between successive steps should be clear. So when someone reads the steps on your use case, should understand why are they the way they are. So use wording that describes the reason behind the sequence. Okay, and use case should describe a complete user transaction. Exception should be described separately and should not be at this level. We're talking about requirements. Okay, we're not talking about actions, like we're not talking mouse clicks and button clicks and open page and stuff like that. We're talking about high level kind of actions. Okay, so that should summarize what you already know about the use cases and the use case models. I have to say that there will be a question in the lab about the use cases, and there will be in the exam as well. Okay, I'm required to do that. Also, but we can talk about the class diagram and design principles. You learned about them in the previous courses as well. If you need a review, we can review it next week, but they're going to be included in the exam as well. Okay, if you can review it from previous course material, that would be great. We can go have a quick go through like we did today. Okay.